Lesson 22 is by far the most complicated lesson the book has tried to present. Starts with a participle future active. Think of the participle as the mood, that's how we always do it, then the tense, and then the voice. In order to form the participle future active, you take the fourth principal part. Remember, that has a masculine, feminine, and neuter form. And then instead of the us, ending, you drop the us, and add urus, ura, urum. And then you just decline that like a regular 2-1-2 adjective like bonus, bona, and bonum. So it's just a regular 2-1-2 adjective. You replace the us, ending of the fourth principal part with a orus, ora, orum. And that is where the word in English future comes from. You can see that there's a remnant of that you are ending there. Futura or futurus is how the Latin writes it. English has a silent E at the end, but it's the same origin. The last example says, Orpheus Euridicem ex orco ductorus respicit et iam emittit. So it says, Orpheus, when he was going to lead Eurydice from Orcus, or from the afterlife, from the underworld, he looked back and sent her away, and sent off her. So again, ductorus is the participle future active. It modifies Orpheus like an adjective, so it's in the nominative singular masculine, just like Orpheus is. In the previous example, cantaturem is in the same case as Orpheus, which is a accusative singular masculine. Nouns and adjectives agree in case number and gender. And again, it probably sounds most natural to translate this sentence with a word when. Orpheus, when he was going to lead Eurydice from Orcus, looked back and sent her away. That's the best and most natural way to translate the participle future active, which is used rather regularly in Latin, unlike English. The next topic is the indicative periphrastic. Periphrastic is difficult to explain, but if you understand that periphrasis means to talk around in Latin, literally it means to, phrase around something, just like the idea of circumlocution, which again is actually Latin meaning talk around the topic. When you understand that, it helps. What the periphrastic is, it's an indirect way to say something. It's like the English expression beating around the bush. It's a different and less direct way to phrase something. It's a way to use a verb in a less direct manner. The periphrastic, I guess in my best summary of what it is an alternative way of expressing verbal tense. It's a different way of using tense that's a little less direct. You'll see what I mean more when I give you examples. What the periphrastic is a way to modify a tense so that you can have a present periphrastic, a future periphrastic, an imperfect periphrastic, a pluperfect periphrastic, a perfect periphrastic, a future perfect periphrastic. You can have it in the indicative mood. For example, you can have an indicative present periphrastic, and you can have it in the active voice. Or you can have the same thing, an indicative present periphrastic in the passive voice. You can even have an infinitive present periphrastic in the active voice or in the passive voice. So it does not replace mood like indicative or infinitive. It does not replace voice like active or passive, but it's a way to describe the tense differently. You can have the regular present or you can have the present periphrastic. You can have the regular future or you can have the future periphrastic. You can have the regular imperfect or you can have the imperfect periphrastic, and so on. That's what the periphrastic is in words. It's easier to see what it is in action. So first you'll learn how to conjugate the indicative tenses in the active voice, and then you'll learn the infinitive. So the indicative comes first. By definition, the periphrastic is the participle future active, which you just learned, plus a form of the verb sum, esse, fui, futurus, futura, futurum. That's the verb to be, or the verb is. So you take the participle future active, then you add some kind of form of the verb to be. So let's look at this indicative present periphrastic in the active voice. You would take the participle future active, you would choose the masculine, or you could add the feminine ending, which is a, or the neuter ending, which is And if you add sum, or s, or est, or sumus, or estis, or sunt, I didn't write them all out, then you'd be conjugating the indicative present periphrastic active. You've taken the fourth principal part and you've added a form of the verb to be. In this case, it's the indicative present active, sum, es, est, sumus, estis, sunt. I only wrote out to sumus for the sake of space. You pick one gender only depending on what the subject of the sentence is. For example, since I'm a man, I would say amaturus sum. If you're a female, you would say amatura sum. If it were a thing, it would say amaturum sum, which of course is unlikely because things aren't speaking. Nonetheless, it is possible. Same thing, amaturus s, or amatura, or amaturum, depending on the gender. When you get to the plural, we, you all, or they, everything beyond this black line, you have to make it plural, amaturi, amaturi, or amatura in the neuter. So the first three are singular, it's amaturus, amatura, amaturum. The second three, we, you all, and they, are plural, and so they would have to have the plural participle future active. Pretty complicated form right there. You can do it in all the different tenses. So look right here, you have the next example is the indicative future periphrastic active. You take the amaturus, or amatura, or amaturum, and remember that has to be singular or plural, depending on the subject. It has to be masculine, feminine, or neuter, depending on the subject. And then you add ero. That's the indicative future active of the verb to be. So it's always the participle future active plus a form of the verb to be. It's amaturus for a man plus ero. If you wanted to say you will be about to love, you would say amaturus, and you're a man, amaturus amaturus eris. He, she, or it, amaturus or erit, and so forth and so on. The pattern continues. You can do it in the imperfect. You would have amaturus or amatura or amaturum plus eram, eras, erat, eramus, eratus, erant. That's the imperfect of the verb to be. And you just combine the amaturus with a space in between the two words and the verb to be. The perfect would do the same thing. Amaturus plus fui. Fuisti, fuit, fuimus, fuistis, fuerunt. The pluperfect is the participle future active plus fueram, which is the pluperfect of the verb to be. And then the indicative future perfect would be amaturus, amatura, amaturum plus fuero, which is the future perfect of the verb to be. They all have kind of funny translations. I'm about to love, or I will be about to love. Note that it's hard to translate or distinguish between the imperfect and the perfect. The imperfect sounds good if you say, I was about to love, but you could also use that for the perfect, I was about to love. It's not a big deal if your imperfect and your perfect translations sometimes sound identical. It's more important to sound like good English than it is to pretend that you can actually translate Latin perfectly every time. But if you want to distinguish, I have been about to love is better than I was about to love. And then you had I had been about to love, and the indicative future perfect, I will have been about to love. So the translation of those should be studied because they are a little bit tricky. The indicative paraphrastics don't show up in a great deal, but they do show up. And so you have to have this in your mind because otherwise you'll be totally lost. It is so strange that you do have to master it in order to competently translate. The paraphrastic can also be used in the infinitive. So far, you're only going to learn the infinitive present active paraphrastic form. It's pretty simple. To form it, you take the participle future active, that's the first thing you learned in this lesson, and then you add essa. Just essa. You don't have to conjugate essa. You never change essa. The ones I just showed you in the indicative, you changed the verb to be. You said sum, est, etc. In the infinitive, essa is the infinitive. The infinitive literally means it is not finite, meaning it does not change. Sum is finite. It refers specifically to I. It has a limit. That's what finite means. S is finite. It refers specifically to you. It has a limit or a finis in Latin. Essa is just to be. It is an unlimited version of the verb to be. So you never change or conjugate the infinitive. It would look simply like this and never change. Amaturas, or a or depending on the gender, plus essa. And it would be translated as to be going to love. To be, making it the infinitive. To be going to love. You would decline the participle part of it, the amaturas, amatura, amaturum, as a normal 2-1-2 adjective. And you would make it agree with the noun that it modifies. It could be in the accusative, it could be in the plural, but you do not conjugate essa ever. Essa stays essa. This paraphrastic has a common use in indirect statement. An indirect statement is all over modern speech and ancient Latin writing. You've learned indirect statement before, but it's useful to have a review because it's a complicated method of communication. In indirect statement, it means that you have two different clauses. There's the so-called main clause and a secondary clause that follows it. The secondary clause is dependent upon the main clause. In the main clause, there's a verb of saying, knowing, thinking, perceiving, or believing. There's going to be a verb of saying, knowing, thinking, perceiving, or believing. For example, I believe that he is very intelligent, or I know that he is the best one on the team, or I think that this is the best day of my life, or I perceive some noises in the background. Any kind of verb that says, knows, I state, I argue, I opine, I consider, any verb that falls in the category of saying something, knowing something, thinking something, perceiving, or believing can introduce a clause of indirect statement. The secondary clause has to have a subject that's in the accusative case. I put accusative tense, of course I mean accusative case. The accusative case is normally used for the direct object. But in indirect statement, the accusative case becomes the subject. That's very strange. And it has to have a verb in the infinitive mood. Again, that's very strange. So an infinitive, including the paraphrastic in the future, implies that the verb happens after the action of the main clause. That's an important little note at the end there that will come into play more in this class as you learn more complicated sentences. And that letter C there will become more clear when I actually give you an example sentence. But if you use a verb in the future in the secondary clause, it means the secondary clause happens after the main clause. It's a key point, very difficult for students to comprehend usually. So look at some examples. In English, you do actually get a kind of structure like this. Sometimes, depending what verb you're using in English, you actually do get something similar to the Latin. For example, I find him, that's an accusative, to be, that's an infinitive, intelligent. Or we consider them, that's an accusative, to be, that's an infinitive, the best. So sometimes English actually does this same structure. After a verb of saying, knowing, or thinking, for example, I find, or we consider, some verbs in English, they are followed by an accusative subject, him instead of he, them instead of they, and an infinitive verb, to be and to be. It does actually happen in English, this structure, but it's not regular. More regularly, you get these kind of examples. We argue that he is the best. Now this he is the nominative, and is not the infinitive. Or I think he is intelligent. Again, you don't say in English, I think him to be intelligent, but Latin always says, I think him to be intelligent. It's very awkward in English. Or you never say in English, we argue that him to be the best. But Latin always says it with the accusative subject and the infinitive verb. So look at the Latin examples right here. Puto, that's the main clause. Just that one verb right there makes its first complete sentence, really. And that's the main clause. It's a verb of saying, thinking, knowing, or perceiving. Puto means I think. The first one says, I think that he, that's an accusative, but you're using it as the subject. And here's the adjective that agrees with it. It's the participle future. I think him to be about to give, daturem esse, to be about to give, that's the participle future periphrastic. I think him to be about to give money. You don't say it like that in English. You'd say, I think he is about to give money. The second one says, I think puto eos daturis esse pecuniam. I think them to be about to give money. Note that daturis agrees with eos, and daturum agrees with eum. Eum is in the accusative singular masculine, and so daturum is in the accusative singular masculine. Daturus and eos are both in the accusative plural masculine, because that participle always agrees with a noun it modifies in case, number, and gender. In addition, what this is that periphrastic. It's the infinitive periphrastic. So it's the participle future active plus a form of the verb to be. Daturem esse is the participle future active plus esse. It's the participle future active daturus plus esse. The two of them put together is the infinitive future periphrastic, and you can use that, and you do use that most commonly in Latin indirect statement. The next point is the comparative degree of adjectives. So adjectives have a positive, comparative, and superlative degree. That's something that you've already learned. In English, they're formed for regular adjectives like this. Big is the positive, bigger is the comparative, and biggest is the superlative. Again, long, longer, longest. And so English does still show some signs of conjugation and declension. We've mentioned that before. This is an example of its declensions. Big becomes bigger, long becomes longer, and the superlative adds est or est for all regular adjectives. In Latin, the comparative is formed as follows. You have to hold on for the next slide. So in Latin, the comparative is formed by taking the feminine form of the adjective. So for example, if you have bonas, bona, bonum, you've got to take the bona form. That's the safest bet because that form, the feminine form, never changes, never gets weird the way sometimes the other forms do. Or if it's, for example, the word omnis, omnis, omne, again, even though the masculine and feminine form happen to be the same, for the sake of argument, always stick with the feminine form because you can never get it wrong. You can never get it wrong if you start with the feminine form of the adjective. So you take the second thing in the dictionary. I always try to make that a point as a common theme in the class. You drop the A or the IS ending. Okay, bona ends with an A, omnis ends with an IS. And then you add eor, eor, eos. Those are the masculine, feminine, and neuter endings in the nominative singular for the comparative adjective. After you add eor, eor, and eos, you decline it like a regular, well, a semi-regular, third declension adjective of two endings. Just like omnis, omnis, omne, except, and this is annoying, I would love to write an angry letter to whoever invented this Latin language because there are so many irregularities at this point. I'm sure it's frustrating to you. It's just as frustrating to me when I first learned it and as someone who has to teach it. Okay, so it's like you decline it like omnis, omnis, omne, but without any extra I's. That is to say, there's no I in the ablative singular, like there is for the I stem nouns. There's no I in the nominative plural neuter, and there's no extra I in the genitive plural. So look at the examples and you'll see what I mean. I'll show you the singular real quick, and then the next page I'll show you the whole thing again. You take the avidas, avida, avidum, that word means greedy. You take the feminine form, avida, you drop the A. In this case, you drop the A because there's no IS to drop. Sometimes it's an A that you drop, sometimes it's an IS. And then you add the eor, or the IUS. That's the masculine, feminine, and neuter, all nominative singular. And then you add the avidioris, and you decline it just like a third declension adjective. So it's avidioris, avidioris again, and avidioris again. All of them the same. That's why I didn't write them out 3 times. The dative is avidore, avidiore, and avidiore. The accusative for the masculine and feminine is avidiorum, but of course the accusative for all the nominatives look exactly the same as the accusatives. And then the ablative singular, that's what I mentioned before, does not have an I. It's avidiore, avidiore, avidiore with an E at the end, with an E at the end every single time. That's what the singular looks like for the comparative adjective. So this word means greedy in its positive form. In the comparative form, it means greedier or more greedy. That's just the singular so far. Now here's the whole pattern. We've already gone over the singular up here. The plural is avidiores, avidiores for the masculine and feminine. For the neuter, it's avidia. Sorry, it should be just avidia. I did add the extra I there. It should just be, it should be avidiora. Avidiores for the masculine and feminine. Avidiora for the neuter. And of course the same thing for the accusative, since the nominative and the accusative for all neuters are the same. The point is that there is no extra I right here. Same thing. It's avidiorum, but no extra I. It's not IUM right here. Avidiorum, avidiorum. Sorry, I spelled that one wrong too. It should be avidioribus, just like it is down here in the ablative. For the dative and the ablative plural, avidioribus all the way through, masculine, feminine, and neuter. audiores for the masculine and feminine accusative, audiora for the neuter, and then audioribus, audioribus, audioribus. That is the comparative form in the singular and the plural for the adjective avidus, which means greedy. All of these forms mean greedier or more greedy. Now, you've already learned the superlative, but I'll review it very quickly. In Latin, the superlative form is, again, you start with the feminine form of the adjective, you drop the a or the is, depending on which kind of ending it has, and then you add issimus, issima, and issimum. Then you decline it like a regular 2-1-2 adjective. So, for example, for avida, that's the feminine form. You drop the a, and then you add avidissimus, avidissima. That's the masculine and feminine, and the neuter would be avidissimum. And then you would just decline that like you would any other 2-1-2 adjective, like bonas, bona, and bonum. That's a much simpler process. And here it is written out again for you. Avidissimus, avidissima, avidissimum. You decline that just like you do bonas, bona, and bonum. That's how you do the superlative. This would be greediest. Superlative is the highest form. It goes positive, comparative, and superlative. Greedy, greedier, greediest. The next point is that as in English, many of the most common adjectives have irregular comparatives and superlatives, and they must be memorized. In English, it's good, better, best, not good, good, or goodest. Just like in Latin, it's bonus, melior, and optimus. And the book has a list of the irregular comparatives and superlatives. You would never be able to predict good, better, and best, just like you would never be able to predict bonus, melior, and optimus. There's nothing that leads you to be able to predict those or form them unless you're a native speaker, and none of you are native speakers of Latin. It would be kind of weird if you were, no offense. So you must memorize that entire list of irregular comparatives and superlatives. Bonus is the positive, melior is the comparative, optimus is the superlative, and there's an entire list in your book of about 6 total that you should know. Adverbs are something that you have not learned to form before, and adjectives can also have, adverbs can also have comparative and superlative forms. So adverbs, just to remind you, are the part of speech that modify nouns or modify or describe verbs. My fault. Now in English, they're formed from adjectives, just like they are in Latin, and they typically end in ly. The adjective slow becomes slowly. And really, if you're going to speak proper English, you should say that he walks slowly, not he walks slow. Same thing. Quick is an adjective that becomes quickly as an adverb. Intelligent becomes intelligently. He does the work intelligently. That's the adverb that modifies a verb. In Latin, adverbs are also formed from adjectives. 2-1-2 adjectives, when they become adverbs, generally end in E or sometimes in O. 3-3-3 adjectives, like omnis, omnis, omne, they typically end in ITER. There are, of course, irregularities, just like there are in English, but generally, your adverbs are going to end in EO or ITER. And probably the majority end in E, and the second most popular is ITER, and O is a distant third. So here are the steps on how to form the adverb right here, starting here. Again, you take the feminine form of the adjective, bonas, bona, bonum. You take the feminine form, that's the second thing in the dictionary. You drop the A or the IS, and then, depending on which adverb it is, you add E. Rarely you add O, or you add ITER. So look at these examples right here. Lightus, lita, litum. There's a regular 2-1-2 adjective. You take the feminine form, lita. You drop the A, and in this case, you add a long E, or just an E. It doesn't matter for long or short in this class. How do you know if you add an E or an O or an ITER? Well, the ITER is only added for 333 adjectives, so that one's easy. The difference between the E and the O is much more difficult. There's no way to predict those without knowing or looking it up in the dictionary. Now, the advantage to this is that you never have to really compose Latin. All you have to do is recognize it. So if the word ends with an E or an O, and you recognize it as an adjectival root, well, then you can translate Latin. You don't have to make this decision yourself. You can look it up when you need to, and you can recognize it. You don't need to really make that decision yourself. So, for example, tutus, tuta, tutum, that's another 2-1-2 adjective. Both of the first examples are 2-1-2 adjectives. And you take the feminine form, you drop the A, and then in this case you add an O instead of the E. If you ever feel the need to compose Latin, and you need to figure out whether you add an E or an O, stick with the E. That's the more common of the two. And then third declension adjectives are easy. You take the feminine form, you drop the IS, and then you add ITER. So, for example, the first one means happily, litus, that's the adverb for happy. The second one, tutus, means safely, and celeris means quickly. You take the adjective happy and make it an ly word. You take the adjective safe and add the ly. You take the adjective quick and add the ly, and now you've got an adverb. In Latin, it's not just an ly that you add, it's an E, an O, or an ITER. ITER is for 333 adjectives. E is the most common one for 2-1-2 adjectives, and in rare cases, you add an O instead of an E. You can also compare adverbs. You can say more quickly or most quickly. You can say more happily or most happily. To compare an adverb, you take the adverb form as it is, for example, awida, greedily, down here. You drop the E at the end, or the O, or the ITER. In this case, with awida, it's an E. And then you add IUS. That's it, just IUS. Nothing but IUS. So if you want to say greedily, you say awida. If you want to say more greedily, you say awidius with an IUS. You can also form the superlative of adverbs. Again, you take the adverb form, you drop the E, the O, or the ITER, and you add isime, just isime at the end. So if you want to say most greedily, you'd say awidisime. There's no masculine, feminine, or neuter for an adverb. So it's just awidius or awidisime. No decision to make there. Awida is greedy, awidius is greedier, and awidisime is greediest. That's how you compare and form the superlative of adverbs. As if that wasn't enough for 5 lessons already, the book also gives you the infinitive. You know a little bit about the infinitive so far. You know that the infinitive is a mood, just like the indicative. You don't know, but now you're learning, that the infinitive has 3 tenses: the present, the future, and the perfect. It does not have an imperfect, it does not have a pluperfect, it does not have a future perfect. It just has the present, the future, and the perfect. And you'll find out that that is the common arrangement. When there isn't extra tenses, the basic tenses are the present, the future, and the perfect. And the infinitive as a mood has 2 voices, active and passive. So here's how you form the different infinitives. To form the infinitive present active, you take the second principal part and you've got it. For example, the second principal part of amo is amore, and that is the infinitive present active. It means to love. Second principal part of moneo is monera. It means to warn. To love, to warn. The infinitive means it has no limit, no finis. It is infinite, which means it is not limited by person or number, I, you, he, she, it, does not apply to the infinitive. So the infinitive present active is easy. You simply take the second principal part and you're done. The infinitive present passive is also fairly easy. The infinitive present passive requires you to take the second principal part. As usual, you drop the re, era, re, and then you add, sorry, this is a typo, not simply I in every case, but then after you drop the re, era, re, you add ri, or ri, then you add just simply I, or I, and then for the last one you add ri again. So look, it's amari, you add ri, then moneri, you add ri, then you just add I to Duke, I to Cap, and then you add ri again to audire. And that translates as to be loved. You see, the subject receives the loving, or to be warned. That's the infinitive present passive. So let's look at the next two, the infinitive future active and the infinitive future passive. The infinitive future active, you take the participle future active. That's the first thing you learned in this chapter, the participle future active. Then you choose a gender, masculine, feminine, or neuter, and then you add the form essa. So for example, you take amaturas, that's the masculine choice of gender, and then you add essa. Or you take amatura or amaturum, only one of those three, amaturas, amatura, or amaturum. Then you put a space, and then you add the word essa, and now you have the participle future active. You translate that as to be about to love. It's the infinitive, so you have to have the to, and in this case, amaturas would be to be about to love. The infinitive future passive starts with a fourth principal part in the neuter singular, and it wrapped around here, only, in the neuter singular only. So you take the fourth principal part, neuter singular only, not the masculine, not the feminine. You don't choose a gender in this case. And then you add a space and the word iri, which means to be going, and you're done. So it would look like this: amatum, only the neuter, iri. And that means to be about to be loved, to be about to receive love, because in the passive voice, the subject receives the action. Monero would be monitum, only in the neuter, plus iri. That would mean to be about to be warned. And the infinitive future passive is very rare. You'll come across it in this textbook for instruction purposes, and you may never ever see it again. Even in future chapters, you probably will not see too much of the infinitive future passive. I'm not discouraging you from learning it. I'm giving you the honest truth. It is not your priority. Two more. There's the infinitive perfect active and the infinitive perfect passive. Infinitive perfect active starts with the third principal part. You drop the I like you always do for the third principal part, and you add ISSE. So amawi will become amawissa, and that means to have loved. Infinitive perfect passive, you start with the fourth principal part, choose a gender, masculine, feminine, or neuter, depending on the subject of the sentence. Then you add essa, and you're done. Amatus, essa, or amata, essa, or amatum, essa. One, but not all three. And that means to have been loved. Last little note in this chapter is that the verb io, ira, or iwi, ituris, itura, ituram, which means to go, That verb, note it has two forms for the perfect, two alternative forms that are perfectly regular once you start them, but they have a different base, a different theme. This verb, the book points out, has a number of compound forms, and its conjugation is irregular. It directs you to the appendix in the back of the book to see the conjugation of the forms, but you should know that it comes and it shows up all over Latin: abeo, adeo, exeo, ineo, obeo, redeo, sobeo, transeo. All those are prefixes and prepositions. They're all formed on the base of the word go. To go across, to go under, to go back, to go upon, to go in, to go out, to go toward, and to go away from. Pretty simple concept.